The Book of Strange New Things by Michel Faber is a genre-defying novel about Peter, a man of faith, who is called to a mission galaxies away from his wife, Bee. Peter is introduced to a seemingly friendly native population, hungry for his teachings, but the letters he receives from his wife back home on Earth become increasingly desperate as natural disasters devastate the planet and governments crumble. Bee is struggling for survival, and their trials are a profound meditation on faith, love, endurance, and our responsibility to those closest to us. Hello and welcome to The Best Book Ever, the podcast where we get to know interesting people by asking them about their favorite book. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and today I am thrilled to welcome back one of my favorite guests, Marion Hill. Marion is the author of the ongoing Cambia Fantasy series, as well as two collections of book recommendations based on his book review website. I always enjoy my chats with Marion because he never fails to introduce me to genres and authors that I've never encountered before, and today's book was no different. I know you're going to enjoy hearing Marion tell me why he thinks The Book of Strange New Things is the best book ever. Hi, Marion. Welcome back to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Thank you, Julie. I'm so glad to come back. This is my third time. I feel like a veteran now. So,
you know what? You're my first three-peat guest.
Oh, wow. Now I feel even more special.
Yeah, this is very exciting. This is, I'm polite. I invite everyone back, but I don't always mean it. With you, I mean it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.
So, since our last visit, what has your reading life been like?
Wow, my reading life has been scattershot. I think I've only read like 8 or 9 books this year so far. I read some short stories, which I posted on Instagram. I've been doing a lot more of short story reading for some reason. I've been really getting into that.
How do you find short stories?
Well, with Goodreads, there's been some recommendations, and then certain authors like a John Updike, which I've read in the past. I've read some of his short stories, or Gene Wolfe. So it's kind of been authors that I've read. I've gone and read some of their shorter work. So it's kind of been more of that. And then I read an Isabel Allende short story called The Little Heidelberg. It's very good. It's in her Stories of Eva Luna. I read the novel Eva Luna, and then she did a collection of short stories. And I just was at random. I picked out this story, and it's about this elderly couple that dances, and they're in this small Caribbean town, but somehow it's connected to Heidelberg, Germany. I don't know how she does it. She did it. But it's a very interesting story. So, and like I said, it's usually been authors I've read, and I've read some of their shorter works or their short story collections out of that. So,
when you find that you're in this life season that you're in, where your reading life slows down a little bit in terms of novels, do you opt for different genres in these really busy lifetimes, or do you just kind of keep going through what you had intended to go through?
Well, interesting. What we're going to discuss today, I was going to have a plan of rereading some of my favorite novels, and this is, I will say, this is one of my 5 favorite novels I've ever read. So I'm going to say that right up front. So my plan was, since I wasn't reading, I was going to go back and read some of my favorite books or novels to see if they still feel the same way. And in this case, it does. So that's kind of what my thinking has been this year so far. So I'm not going to read as much, but I'm going to try to reread books that I've read in the past and see if I had the same feeling if I read them the first time or the second time or so forth.
So before we get to this one, then, what has it happened where any of them have not held up?
No, actually, I'm trying to think. The ones I've reread, I've still felt the same, or maybe not the same exact way, but I felt strong feelings about the book, and I still realize why it's one of my favorites. So I'll put it that way.
So it stays up there in your your trophy case, I guess.
Yes.
So tell me, this book that we're discussing today, The Book of Strange New Things by Michel Faber.
I think it's Michel Faber. Yes,
Michel Faber.
Yep.
Tell me how you first came across this book.
Well, I read this book back in 2015, and either somebody recommended it to me or I read something online. I can't say exactly how I read it. And then I read it, and I was just fascinated with this story. I read literary fiction, so it's not a diss or a criticism. It's just a lot of it is, dysfunctional families, that type of stuff. And this, which is a dysfunctional marriage, but he is adding elements of science fiction to it that isn't common that I've read. And now rereading it for the second time, I felt the same way. And I was just like, there's a lot here. I found out that this is the last novel he wrote because his wife had passed away of cancer, and his wife was his first reader. And she was the one that kind of brought him into writing this type of story. Because I don't know if he was an atheist, but he was not a believer.
So, tell me the chronology. His wife died before he wrote this?
Yeah, before the book was published in, I think, November or October 2014, his wife had passed away. And he had, now, some I've read, he had declared this was his last novel he was going to write. I think he's published some other stuff, like some poems and other stuff after it. But this was his last novel, and he dedicated it to her. And then from what I'm understanding, and I was still trying to find some stuff on it that either he's an atheist or he fell out of faith or whatever, but he was definitely not a believer when he wrote this. It was coming from a different perspective. And his wife helped him shape this novel to include that perspective.
I am fascinated that he wrote about a dissolution of a marriage while he was going through that kind of grief and trauma.
Right.
I wouldn't have expected that. I would have expected, like, if you were going to tell me your new background, I would have expected you to say he was going through a divorce himself or a dissolution of a marriage wow.
From what I understand, they had a great marriage. And she was like his main first reader, his critic. She really pushed him to become the writer she was. And so this was kind of his love letter to her, basically.
I can't decide if that is the saddest thing I've ever heard or the most romantic. In one sense, it's just such a grand gesture. And then on the other thing, it makes me a little angry. How dare you deprive the world of your genius?
Yeah.
He's a brilliant writer.
He really is. And like I said, I have to say the backstory is probably what has lifted this novel even more. Hey, the novel's great and I love reading, but the backstory, and I think in this polarized, divided world, to see somebody who has a different faith, or we can talk about politics, to write a character outside of their being as well as he did with this character, to me, it gives me hope. And to me, this is one of the reasons why I read, because I want to be taken on a journey. And a lot of times, and again, there's nothing wrong with reading for comfort. There's nothing wrong with reading for pleasure. We all need that. But sometimes you want to be taken somewhere different. In this novel, whether you like it or dislike, because I know there's people who dislike the novel. It can be polarizing, but he took me somewhere.
Why don't you tell our listeners what this book's about?
So basically, the Book of Strange New Things is about this story of this pastor, this English pastor named Peter, who gets selected to go on this mission, to this space colony. I guess it's more of a colony than like a planet or what have you, by this organization called USIC. I guess they're like a NASA type organization. And when he gets there, he finds this colony of, they're called Oceans, and I'm probably mispronouncing it. Tell her.
Yeah, that's what I was saying to myself the whole time I was reading too.
Oceans, and they're like humanoid, alien. They have human characteristics, but they're definitely alien. And so, and these folk, this colony of people, they believe in Jesus. They believe in the New Testament. That's basically, and they named themselves Jesus. So they're very much of that. And he's there to continue the proselytization of these people and his beliefs. And as he gets there, his wife he leaves behind in London, and her life in London is going a hell into a handbasket. It's a post-apocalyptic world, and they communicate by letters to each other. And the letters in the beginning are very supportive and what have you. And then the letters get worse and worse as time goes on. And obviously there's something, I don't want to give it away what happens with the wife, but there's a thing that realizes the separation between the two. And then he has to make a decision if he's going to stay or is he going to finally return.
So tell me what you think of this.
Oh, man. And like I said, this is one of my 5 favorite novels that I've ever read. In all the years I've read, I really and it's interesting. It's the character of Peter, which I like. I actually like the character of Granger, the one that drove him more this time than I did the first time. And I think because obviously they have a connection, and I'll just leave it at that. They have a connection. But I think sometimes in novels, especially novels that deals with religion, whether it's Christianity or any other thing, a lot of times we don't see shades of gray, and we see this here. And maybe because the writer's background is distant, is not, he's not of the faith anymore or what have you. He's able to have that distance. But that's what I love, because sometimes as a believer, you have to have your faith tested. And obviously he had his faith tested here. And she was one of the ones that in her own way tested him, as well as the other members of the colony. But to me, that relationship, as much as it was about the relationship between him and B, that relationship was a big part of this story. And it just shows the contrast and why people believe and why people don't. And that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed reading the novel.
Did you recognize that the first time you read it? Was that your feeling that was the main conflict then? Or is that a change in your own
That's
thinking?
A change, because I was really focused on Peter and his wife, which obviously it is a big part, no question. But she was more of a side character. But this time reading it, and in she reveals her own backstory, which Peter connected with. I was like, okay, she's much more important to this story than just a side character. Much more important than I gave it the first time. So that to me stood out this time.
Oh, that's really interesting, because this is my first time reading it, and I really only focused on the marriage, Peter and B.
Yeah.
So I wonder if I reread it, if I'll have that same revelation.
And I got a sense of a richness, and obviously, as you find out her own story, and they connected. And obviously Peter had a past, so he came from a past, and I think those two connected on that level. Now, they may not have been romantic partners. He was married, but there was a connection there, and I got it this time more so than reading it for the first time.
I feel like he's a literary writer, and he used this tool of sci-fi to get him somewhere else, which I can't help but notice. You've done this to me 3 times now, right? Where
Yes.
I mean, this is in my notes here. The 3 books that you've talked about here are books that have a genre framework, but are about much, much bigger things than aliens or fairies in not fairies. What were they in the first one? The magic?
Numina. They in the memory and dream. Art that came to life. We call them Numina or something like that. Yes.
So there was a fantasy element to that. There was a bit of a post-apocalyptic to Parable of the Sower. And all of those things have a little bit of a framework, but they're all sort of grappling with really big issues of faith, I think. All 3 of them.
They are.
Is that intentional in your reading?
I think so. Now that you brought that up, and I think these are the kind of books I gravitate towards, like a book like The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell, or Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, which is a fantastic novel. I highly recommend that. Or an old book called Downward to Earth by Robert Silverberg. He deals with this directly as well. And I think those type of books are the books because I've always been fascinated by why people believe, whether it's the major Western religions or Eastern religions or astrology or whatever, we believe in something bigger than ourselves. And even now, people believe in their materialists, but I'm just saying people believe in something bigger than themselves. And I've always thought that fantasy and science fiction can explore those things, unlike literary fiction.
Absolutely.
So I like that blurring of genres or that type of mixture, because it makes me interested as a reader. And so I think, thinking about all my favorite books, they have those type of elements to it.
Do you feel like this is a religious book?
I don't feel like it's a religious book. I feel like the story is just about a man and who he's dealing with his faith, trying to pursue it, but on the other hand, is losing the one person he loves the most. And it's clearly he loves his wife. This is not this is about and trying to reconcile with, how do I pursue God in the Christian term, and how do I keep the woman I love who basically brought him here, brought him to faith. So I don't think it's a Christian fiction novel in that sense, but it definitely deals head on with Christianity, deals on with belief. And I think even people who aren't religious or don't believe in Christianity could get something out of it as far as that story. I don't think people should be pushed away from that. So definitely.
Yeah. And I would even be nervous to put it anywhere near that, because it felt very bleak to me.
Yeah.
And it felt, all I kept thinking, the word arrogance kept coming up in my mind of the absolute unmitigated gall of going to another planet to evangelize.
Yes.
And colonize. I mean, we all know colonization is already.
Yes.
And so through this whole thing, I kept thinking, this is meant to be a satire of religion, I think.
It could be. For me, I think what your points are absolutely valid, Judy, but I think for me, because the Osans already was believers and they believed in this, that gave it a different twist. Now, if they had never heard of Christianity, or if he frames the story in that way, and then Peter comes and introduced it, but they had already had a belief system of Christianity. And so he is coming there to kind of enhance that. It wasn't like he was coming there. And then obviously he ends up having a connection with them, which, you get into as well. So that, to me, that twist, and maybe this was his wife's influence, kind of softened it from being a satire or an attack of religion. It was more of an exploration to me. That's what I gathered from it. So,
what did you make of the fact that he left behind an earth on fire? It's frightening.
And I think I keep thinking about folks who go on missions, and I'm talking long-term missions. They leave behind whatever their situation is in their regular life, and you get so caught up in this world. And I think Faber did a good job of showing how you can get tunnel vision with that, and you can become extreme with that, and not understand that there's a regular life that you are a part of as well. And I think Faber did, and I think I got more of that this time than I did the first time reading it. But so that's what my mind went to, is people who go on these long-term missions. And I'm not saying what they're doing is not great, but I'm saying there is a cost for that. And you have to weigh the cost out. And I think he had been changed from his former life, and he was going to try to pursue this very much. And his wife, Bia, had a much more realistic view, which turned dark, and so you saw that contrast between the two.
I'm really rethinking now the relationship between Peter and Granger, because the other thing I have here in my notes is, this is the loneliest book I have ever read. It felt to me that this book is about loneliness and distance.
Yes, you're right. I agree.
Between distance in this marriage, both physical and emotional, massive physical distance and emotional.
Yes.
Distance from Earth to Oasis, distance between gods and humans.
Yes.
Between us and the aliens, I guess.
Yeah.
But now I'm rethinking it. Your comments about Granger are really reshuffling these puzzle pieces for me, because I did feel like it was just about loneliness and breakdown of community.
But even though she came across as abrupt and harsh, I immediately, this time I got it. She liked him.
And you didn't catch that the first time through.
I didn't catch that the first time. No.
Yeah.
No. And then as the relationship, they got to know each other better. And even when she kind of distanced herself of a certain event, I won't go into detail to give away, but she liked him. She had a connection. And I think Peter talked about his drug addiction and alcoholism and the stuff he overcame. And I think, to me, like I said, I think though that past of Peter's somehow felt real to Granger. And maybe I'm speculating here, but I just felt like that connection, it wasn't just he was this preacher and he knew all the answers. He had his own issues, even though he was a true blue believer. And I think she either, I won't say respect, but she didn't feel like, how can I say it? he wasn't above her. I don't want to say they felt like equals, but it's just like they had a connection. I'm sorry, I can't articulate it, but it feels like that's what I got more this time. So
yeah, I think I know what you're saying. Whenever you meet someone who is in the clergy in any form, it's very tempting to think that person couldn't possibly understand. They're a holy person. They've never experienced these temptations or these sins or however you want to frame those things. And that's true. I see what you're saying, because her connection to him was, he had led a very real life and a scary and ugly life in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so it broke down that immediate barrier that a lot of us have when we're around the ordained folk, where we get intimidated and think, well, they're perfect and therefore a little bit less human because they're wearing a collar.
There it is.
Yeah.
And I think if he had gone to seminary, he went from, high school, college to seminary, and he went that track, he would have had much more, I guess, academic, but he wouldn't have had the realness. And I think she connected to his realness as a human being more than him if he had gone another track to become a pastor. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's something about the scars that made it easier for her to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so you're making me rethink this book now. So we're kind of lucky here because we get to be with you as you're thinking through your review. Now, I've said in both your other episodes, I really love your book review website, and I always love your thoughtful reviews. And you told me before we started recording that you just finished the last 60 pages this morning of your reread, and you're just starting to think through your review. So walk us through what that looks like for you. How do you work through a review of a book?
Usually I get a quote from the book, or I trust my instinct to what I'm going to say first, because I have to have an opening. Okay, where am I going to lead this review? And obviously reading is subjective, so I'm not saying I'm Mr. Objective. I have my own feelings, but my reviews, I'm never going to try to tear a book down or say a book is bad. I'm going to try to my reasons, whether I like the book or didn't like the book. In this case, I love the book, so this is going to be easy. But I was just trying to find an opening, and I will say for me, the opening to this one is going to be, there's a scripture in Romans 12:1 where he talks about be not conformed to this world. And to me, that's kind of the genesis of what Peter's story is about, because he's trying to live for God and he's going away from this world. So
literally
to fulfill that. And how do you handle, and then he has this life with his wife back on earth, but being on this planet, he's so removed from that, and he's not connected to her. And that's something a lot of believers struggle with. How do we live in this world and live for your faith?
Have you read any other books by Michel Faber?
No, this is the only one I've read. And I understand, is it The Crimson, Pale, and White or something like that? That's supposed to be a really good book, but this is the only book I've read of it. So, and I don't know about the other ones. So
I'll tell you what, I've had that Crimson, Petal, and the White on my shelf, I think since it was released, which is 20 years ago.
Okay.
And it's one of those books, and I've told you about this before, I get intimidated by books for no good reason. But to me, that book is so intimidating. And I was really glad to read this one, because I thought, maybe if I read this one and I'll see it's just words on a page.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like this was a challenge. I mean, it was emotionally challenging and philosophically challenging, but it's not like I needed a dictionary nearby to understand what the words were. So I don't know why I'm intimidated by his work otherwise.
No, it was quite readable. He had to tell this story, and I was hooked. I was hooked in it. I was into it. So
yeah, it was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And I liked that I couldn't quite place what the author was trying to. I think it would have been very obvious if he was trying to evangelize me.
Right.
Or if he was trying to steer me away from organized religion. And I didn't feel either of those things. I think he was telling a story and saying, what do you think?
Right, exactly. And that's why I think his background was so important. And that
is
added
so
that dimension
interesting
to it. So I'm like, okay, he actually, the the thing that we all writers want to do, whatever story we want to write, and especially as someone who has different beliefs from you, can you make that person feel real without falling to stereotypes or falling to the things that automatically will take you one direction or another? Yeah. He's literally saying, here's the story of this guy, what he's going through, and he's handing it to you, and you make your own assumptions about it. And I love it. I really love it for that. I really, really do.
I didn't expect to like it, as usual. Because
I was a little bit worried because of the religious angle. He takes a big swing here. And I want to read writers who take big risks, even if they fail. I want to see him take big risks. And that, to me, this fits this book. He took a big risk.
Yes.
And I understand to some people it could be polarizing because he talks about scripture. He does not hold back from that. And if you have a experience with religion or Christianity that's troubling, I can see people. But if you give it a chance and you just take the story on its own terms, it's a fantastic story. It's bleak, sad, but it's a great story. Yeah.
Yeah, because every scripture meditation, it's always accompanied by these missives of planet Earth burning down, quite literally in catastrophic climate decline. So that undercuts any hint of a religious agenda from the author, I think.
Right. I think so too. And it's interesting that and I guess he lives in Scotland, he made the pastor English. I wonder if this would have been an American pastor and how he would have viewed that. That's the other thing I was thinking about, because he is English. And so even though we speak the same language, our cultures are different. I was thinking about that the whole time, that what if he had made this an American pastor in the South? How would that have, again, it probably been a different story, or it'd have been a little bit more, I don't want to say fire and brimstone, but that's exactly what I was thinking. But he was English, so he had a distance or a unique perspective to it, which that brought to mind as well. So.
Okay, now I want you to write that book of an American pastor who does it.
I
really do.
That's a lot of pressure.
I know. And that could go either way too. That could be the funniest book ever written, or it could also be the bleakest book ever written.
Exactly.
Honestly, it would be a whole different story.
Yeah, it probably would.
So tell me, Marion, what's on your nightstand right now?
Well, I'll ask you this question. Have you ever read a book or a book series where the first book, you did not like the character and you thought you were going to stop reading, and you end up reading the remaining books in the series?
Sorta. I just went through this with the A Court of Thorns and Roses fantasy series that everybody's losing their minds about. And I read the first one and I kind of went, it's okay. And then all my friends told me, you got to go on. And book 2 was great.
Okay.
And so but then I didn't like book 3. So. Okay.
So mine is Richard Ford, the sports writer. He wrote, these literary fiction, and the main character, Frank, he's chronicling his life. So in the sports writer, he's in his 30s. He ends up divorced, and the guy was a jerk. He was a womanizer. He was a cad. And it was beautifully written, but I was like, I'm not going to continue to read on. Well, the second book is Independence Day, and he's in his 40s now. And it just chronicles his life. And then the third book is called The Lay of the Land. He wrote 10 years later in his 50s. And then he wrote, I forget the fourth book, but there are a series of novellas. He's in his 60s. So now his latest book and the final one in the series called Be Mine. And he's in his 70s now. And now he's going to be a caretaker for his son, which we met back in Independence Day. And so he's chronicling American life from a liberal Watts perspective, but somehow his writing, his storytelling is fantastic. And I did not like Frank in the sports writer, the first book, but I kept reading. And so like I said, the latest one just came out last week. And so I'm like, I'm going to read that. And so to end the stories, it's 5 books in the series. But,
is it fiction or it's a memoir?
It's fiction. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a sports writer is the first book, Independence Day, The Lay of the Land, and I forget the fourth one. And then this one's called Be Mine. But if you look up Richard Ford, you'll see it, because he's considered one of the heavy hitters in literary fiction. And he wrote this series. And I did not like Frank Baskin. Like I said, he was a womanizer. He was a cad. He was a jerk in the sports writing. And then you see him mature through these books. And even though he still has those characteristics, I'm just like, Okay, I get it. It's like a very interesting book. So book series.
Are you saying it was the skill of the writing? Even though you disliked him, you went on just for the skill of the writing?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think I would do that. Yeah. I tend to give up and go, these people are irritating me, even though the writing's good. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and really the Independence Day is probably the book that sold me. The skill of the writer is what has kept me reading it. So, but that's what I'm going to read next.
Do you feel like your own writing is changing as, as you were telling me about the Richard Ford books, and it's about this person growing, and is your current work in progress? Is it a continuation of your series?
Yes, it's of Cisco's Dance. And so it's called, the new book is going to be called Cassandra's Revelation. And it's a story about the most famous singer in the city of Terrence. And think of a Aretha Franklin, a Diana Ross type. I've always been fascinated with music. As much as I love books, I love music just as much. Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to tell a story about a singer at the crossroads of their career. And I'm going to do this in a fantasy perspective. And so what do you do when you were the one, everyone loved you, but now you got someone else coming up behind you and they're the one, and how do you hold on to your career? So that's kind of what the elements of the story is about. So I hope to have it out by the beginning of next year, but I'll keep you posted. And also it's going to be my first time writing a female character straight on. And so I'm learning. I mean, I've been married, I've been divorced, I got 4 sisters. So I'm pulling on all those elements to try to be as realistic as me as a man possible, trying to write a female character.
Yeah.
Hopefully it turns out well.
You can have your sisters check it over first, right?
Yes, I will.
So I know that no two writers are the same, but who would you say most influences you in terms of your own writing? Is there a specific author that you feel is sort of your godfather or godmother of?
Probably Charles Allende, which we discussed. Yeah, I really like his elements of fantasy and bringing in the real world and this blending of genres. And also he's set this novel in this fictional city called Newford. And I've always been fascinated with cities and why people live on certain sides of town. Just the relationship between the haves and have-nots in the city, and all those elements. And he brings those stuff out. So he's definitely been inspiration and a I don't want to say mentor because I don't know him personally, but he's someone I've always admired and looked to as far as where fiction can go, and especially for genre fiction. And I've always admired him for that.
Well, I want to thank you because you continually introduce me to, I guess we should call it literary genre fiction, that I always shy away from on my own. And you always bring these to me. And I just am such a broken record. I say this every time. I didn't expect to like it, and I didn't expect to get so much out of it. I always think sci-fi is just aliens stabbing each other and robots stabbing each other. And I'm so wrong all the time.
It's a vast genre. And I want to say this. I really appreciate these 3 times I've been on the show. You've been very open into reading, and it just fits into my philosophy about reading widely and reading diversely. And even if you don't like it or like a book, but you try it, and you see, and you take that journey. And so you've been open, and I really appreciate that. And so I just appreciate you, having the platform and the forum to discuss those things.
Oh, thank you. Well, I learned a lot from you because of your continued reviews. And every time I look at your website, I go, oh my God, he reads everything. But see, the difference is you do it on your own. I have to be forced into it for the podcast. And you're always intentionally reading new genres. I get them and I go, oh, dang, I have to read a robot book? What? So, Marion, will you share with our listeners where they can find you online?
Yeah, you can find me at my website at marion-hill.com. That's where all my reviews are posted pretty much, and everything about my fiction is all there. And I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's my only social media site. So at marhill31. And I usually take my reviews that I put on my website and I post them there. And I really talk about books and stuff like that, and music and other things as well. So, but those are 2 main places where you can find me.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me. As always, it is so great to talk to you. I can't wait to talk to you again in a year and hear what you've been reading.
I'm going to try Guy Gabriel Kay. That's next on my list. Thank you for having me, Julie. I really appreciate it.
Bookworms, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Book of Strange New Things. Have you read it? Do you want to? Let me know over on Instagram at Best Book Ever Podcast. Links to everything Marion and I discussed are available in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review wherever you're listening. If you want to learn more about my weekly guests, as well as get a little peek into what I'm reading and listening to in my free time, subscribe to my weekly pod newsletter at bestbookeverpodcast.substack.com. The newsletter is free, but once you get there, you'll also see a few different paid options if you want to help me keep the candles burning over here in my reading cave. Thanks for joining me today, and as always, I will see you at the library.